I didn't know our relationship was about to be tested by something as ridiculous and as terrifying as a designer purse sitting in the crook of my boyfriend's arm like a bomb nobody wanted to admit was ticking. 3 days ago, I opened the door to our apartment after work, still in my blazer, still mentally arguing with a spreadsheet in my head, and I found Elian standing in the living room. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't excited. He looked trapped. In his hands was a brand new designer bag, one of those glossy, perfectly structured ones you see behind glass at boutiques, the kind that costs more than our monthly rent. He held it the way you hold something you didn't steal, but also don't want in your house. Marcus dropped it off, Elian said quietly, not meeting my eyes. He came by while you were at work. Marcus, the childhood friend he hadn't seen in years, the one who had moved back to town and suddenly had a Tesla, a too-perfect house in a too-expensive neighborhood, and a habit of inviting Elian to exclusive events where somehow I never had a seat. This was the fourth expensive gift in 2 months. And every single time, Marcus did the same thing. He denied it. Didn't know what we were talking about. Must have been a mistake. Wrong address. Weird coincidence. Except nothing about it felt like coincidence anymore. Because I'd watched Marcus at a holiday party clutch a second gift like it was sacred, his jaw tightening when someone else's hand got too close to it. I'd watched him pull Elian aside, watched Elian open a small box, and watched the color drain from his face before he snapped it shut like he was closing a door he couldn't reopen. Diamond earrings, a matching necklace, thousands of dollars. And when Elian finally returned it, politely, carefully, with a note meant to protect feelings, Marcus didn't get sad. He got possessive. 30 texts in less than half an hour. Words that didn't sound like gratitude anymore, but like ownership. Promises that weren't romantic, they were claims. Then our doorbell camera caught him on our porch, ringing again and again, leaving the jewelry at our door like a threat wrapped in velvet. And that was just the beginning, because the truth about Marcus, the house, the money, the success, wasn't just a lie. It was a whole mask. And when a private investigator finally called us with what he'd uncovered, I realized something cold and clear. Marcus hadn't come back to town to reconnect. He came back to take. I'm Daphne, 27, and I've always been the kind of woman who plans like the ground could disappear if I don't. I work as a project coordinator for a construction company. Deadlines, budgets, punch lists, the constant hum of what could go wrong. It's not glamorous, but it's stable. It's mine. And stability matters to me because I didn't grow up with much of it. I grew up watching adults smile through stress, pretending the cracks weren't spreading. That's probably why I fell so hard for Elian. We met almost 4 years ago at a cooking class downtown, one of those date night experiences people buy as gifts and then actually show up to because they feel guilty letting it expire. I went alone because my friend backed out last minute. Elian went alone because he said he was trying to learn how to feed himself like an adult. Within 15 minutes, we'd both ruined pasta. He burned the bottom of his pan so badly, the room smelled like toast and regret. I oversalted the sauce until it tasted like ocean water. We looked at each other across the counter, and instead of embarrassment, we laughed. Real laughter, the kind that makes your shoulders unclench. After class, we ended up getting coffee, still teasing each other about our culinary crimes. Elian had this warm, steady energy. Not loud, not showy, just kind. The kind of man who listens like he's not waiting for his turn to speak. The kind of man who remembers your details. He told me he worked as a nurse at the children's hospital. The way he said it wasn't proud in a braggy way, more like it was heavy and meaningful, and he carried it carefully. I remember thinking, this is a man who knows what real problems look like. He won't create drama for fun. 6 months later, we were practically living together. 2 years in, we moved into a nice 2-bedroom apartment in the suburbs. Safe complex, decent parking, a small balcony that gets late afternoon sun. Not fancy, but comfortable. The kind of place you can picture growing into a future. We talked about marriage the way you talk about something you're not rushing but also not afraid of, like it's waiting patiently for the right season. Elian isn't rich. I'm not either. We're comfortable because we're careful. We budget, we save. We argue sometimes about stupid things, whether we should replace a perfectly fine couch, whether we're eating out too much, whether I'm overworking. But our relationship has always been a team. When something scares him, he tells me. When I'm anxious, he holds my hand like it's an anchor. That's why what happened with Marcus hit like a splinter under the skin. Small at first, easy to ignore, until it starts aching constantly. Elian grew up here in the city. When he was 8, his family moved into a middle-class neighborhood about 20 minutes from where we live now. That neighborhood shaped him. Everyone knew everyone. Kids rode bikes in packs. Parents watched from porches like a silent security system. It was there, in elementary school, that Elian met Marcus. According to Elian, Marcus lived 4 houses down. Same bus, same after-school programs, the kind of friendship that forms before you even know what betrayal looks like. They were inseparable from 3rd grade through 8th. Sleepovers, video games, backyard adventures, inside jokes that lasted for years. High school pulled them apart naturally. Elian joined debate and student government. Marcus got into computers and drifted toward the tech crowd. They stayed friendly, but the closeness faded. And then Marcus's life cracked open. Junior year, his parents went through an ugly divorce that dragged on for almost 2 years. His dad moved out of state for a sales job and basically disappeared. His mom, who'd been a stay-at-home mom for years, suddenly worked 2 part-time jobs just to keep the lights on. Marcus started coming home to an empty house. He ate cereal for dinner. He stopped showing up the way he used to. Elian's parents, Rosa and Miguel, noticed. That's the kind of people they are. Rosa runs a small accounting firm. Miguel teaches middle school math. Not wealthy, just generous in a way that feels old-fashioned now. They started inviting Marcus over. One dinner became many. Eventually, Marcus was spending 3 or 4 nights a week at their house during junior and senior year. Rosa packed extra lunches for him. Miguel helped him with college applications and financial aid paperwork. Marcus wrote them a long thank you letter when he graduated. He got a full scholarship to a tech program 3 hours away. For a while, it looked like kindness had done what it was supposed to do, lift someone up. Elian stayed local at first, then finished his nursing degree downtown. Marcus moved to Seattle for tech work. Years passed. They followed each other on social media and barely spoke. Then 3 months ago, Marcus moved back. And the moment he reappeared, it felt like he didn't just return to town. It felt like he returned with a plan. Marcus re-entered our lives quietly at first, so quietly that, looking back, I almost feel embarrassed by how easily I let it slide. It started at a birthday party for one of Elian's old high school friends. A crowded living room, cheap wine, loud laughter, bouncing off the walls. Like nothing bad had ever happened there, I remember standing next to Elian when Marcus walked in, and my first thought was how different he looked from the boy Elian had described. The awkward kid with messy hair and hand-me-down clothes was gone. In his place stood a man in a tailored jacket, an expensive watch catching the light every time he gestured, confidence wrapped around him like armor. He drove a Tesla. He spoke smoothly. And when Elian introduced us, Marcus shook my hand politely, firm grip, brief smile, then turned his full attention back to Elian as if I'd already served my purpose. At the time, I told myself I was being sensitive. They were catching up after years apart. Shared history does that. I stayed close enough to hear snippets of conversation. Names from their childhood, teachers, streets I'd never walked, but far enough to feel irrelevant. Before the night ended, Marcus invited both of us to see his house the following weekend. I remember thinking it was a good sign, inclusive, friendly. That illusion lasted exactly 1 visit. Marcus's house wasn't just nice, it was excessive. A modern structure tucked into one of the most expensive neighborhoods in the city. 6 bedrooms, a home office, 3-car garage, a backyard with a pool and an outdoor kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Everything gleamed with newness and money. And yet, from the moment we walked in, I felt like a background prop. Marcus directed nearly every comment to Elian, every question, every nostalgic story. When I spoke, he answered politely, briefly, then pivoted right back to Elian like I was a pause button he didn't mean to press. During the tour, Elian casually mentioned he'd always wanted a stand mixer like the one sitting on Marcus's marble counter. It was an expensive, professional-grade model. Marcus nodded, said something vague about how useful it was for baking. I didn't think anything of it. We stayed for dinner, catered from an upscale restaurant. Candles, linen napkins, the kind of meal that feels like a performance. Again, Marcus talked almost exclusively to Elian. When I tried to add stories about our life together, things Elian and I had built, Marcus smiled and redirected the conversation back to the past. I left feeling strangely invisible. Elian noticed it too, though he framed it gently. I think he's just excited, he said. We haven't really talked in years. I wanted to believe that. 4 days later, a large box appeared on our doorstep. Inside was the exact same stand mixer Elian had admired, plus expensive attachments. No receipt, no note, no explanation. When Elian texted Marcus to ask about it, Marcus denied everything, claimed he had no idea what we were talking about, suggested it must have been a delivery mistake. That should have been the moment I pushed harder. Instead, we waited. The mixer sat unused in our kitchen for a week, like an uninvited guest. Eventually, Elian convinced himself it was probably a mistake, that whoever sent it would come looking for it. No one did. Then came the knives. Elian had mentioned them once, offhand, during a coffee meetup with Marcus. 2 days later, a high-end knife set appeared at our door. Again, Marcus denied sending it. After that, the gifts kept coming. A high-end coffee machine, a leather jacket Elian had admired in a store window, a silk scarf from a boutique downtown. Each time, Marcus denied responsibility. Each time, Elian looked more uncomfortable, but also more conflicted. He didn't want to seem ungrateful. He didn't want to accuse someone who had once been practically family. At the same time, Marcus began inviting Elian to exclusive events, wine tastings, charity auctions, gallery openings, and somehow there was always a reason I couldn't come. Only one guest pass, too small of a venue, work-only event. Elian never hid it from me. He told me everything. He came home talking about art and wine and places I'd never been invited into, not with excitement, but with a strange tension behind his eyes. I trusted Elian completely. But trust doesn't stop your instincts from whispering, and mine had started screaming something was wrong. Because generosity doesn't feel secretive, and friendship doesn't feel like erasure. And somewhere deep down, I knew Marcus wasn't trying to reconnect with Elian's past. He was trying to rewrite Elian's present. The moment everything crossed from uncomfortable into undeniable happened at our friend group's annual holiday party. It's usually harmless chaos. Cheap wine, ugly sweaters, music too loud for the size of the living room. We do a white elephant gift exchange every year, the kind where people fight over ridiculous things like novelty mugs or joke candles. Nothing serious, nothing expensive. That's why I noticed immediately when Marcus arrived with 2 gifts. One was clearly for the exchange, the right size, sloppily wrapped, a gag tag dangling from the ribbon. The second one was different, smaller, heavier, wrapped meticulously in matte paper with a satin bow. He kept it separate, tucked under his arm like something fragile, something private. I felt a small tightening in my chest, the kind that happens before your brain catches up. During the exchange, someone accidentally reached for the second gift, assuming it belonged with the pile. Marcus reacted instantly, too instantly. He pulled it back like his hand had been burned, his jaw tightening, his smile vanishing for just a second too long. "That's not part of the game," he snapped. The room went quiet for a beat. He laughed it off a moment later, but the tension lingered like smoke. People exchanged looks. Someone made a joke to smooth it over. The music got turned up. I didn't laugh. Near the end of the night, I saw Marcus lean toward Elian and say something low in his ear. Elian stiffened. Marcus handed him the second gift. From across the room, I watched Elian open it. I didn't need to see inside to know something was wrong. His shoulders dropped. His face went pale. His lips parted slightly like he'd forgotten how to breathe. He snapped the box shut almost immediately, like the contents were radioactive. He said something quick to Marcus, his voice too soft, too urgent, and walked straight toward me. "We should go," he said, not meeting my eyes. In the car, the silence stretched until it felt suffocating. Finally, Elian opened the box. Inside were diamond earrings, real ones, unmistakably expensive, and a matching necklace. The kind of jewelry you don't give casually. The kind that carries weight, meaning, expectation. My hands curled into fists in my lap. "This isn't okay," I said quietly. Elian nodded, swallowing hard. "I know. I didn't ask for this. I didn't want this." We didn't argue. We didn't raise our voices. We sat there, 2 people staring at the same truth from opposite sides of the same fear. For 2 days, we talked it through. Slowly, carefully. Elian wanted to return the jewelry. He felt sick thinking about keeping it. I agreed, but I also knew returning it wasn't enough. There had to be boundaries. I suggested Elian tell Marcus directly that the gifts and the one-on-one events were making both of us uncomfortable, that if Marcus wanted to be part of our lives, it had to be as a friend to both of us. Elian hesitated, Not because he disagreed, but because he still believed Marcus's intentions weren't malicious. He thought Marcus was trying, awkwardly, to repay a debt from the past. Kindness received, kindness returned. Just poorly executed. We compromised. Elian would return the jewelry. He'd explain gently but clearly that it was too much. He'd suggest that if Marcus wanted to give back, he could donate to the children's hospital where Elian worked. Something meaningful, something appropriate. The conversation was supposed to happen in person, but Marcus called that morning and said he had to leave town unexpectedly for a business emergency. He asked if they could talk when he got back. Something about the timing made my stomach sink. Still, we waited. Elian didn't want to escalate unnecessarily. He wanted to believe this could still end quietly. So when Marcus posted on social media that he was at a networking event downtown, Elian decided to return the jewelry without waiting. He drove to Marcus's house with his coworker Sarah, for safety, and left the box on the doorstep with a carefully written note. The note was kind, grateful, firm without being cruel. We thought that would be the end of it. Marcus got home around midnight. By 12:20 a.m., Elian's phone started buzzing, then buzzing again. And again, over 30 messages in less than half an hour. I watched Elian read them, his face tightening with every line. Marcus wasn't apologetic. He was angry, accusatory, possessive. He said Elian was ungrateful, that he didn't understand how lucky he was to have someone who cared this much. He said he was bringing the jewelry back because Elian was just being modest. He said Elian deserved nice things, and that he would make sure Elian got them for the rest of his life. My skin went cold. This wasn't generosity. This was entitlement. We didn't respond that night. We turned the phone face down and tried to sleep, but I lay awake listening to Elian's breathing, counting the seconds between each inhale. In the morning, Elian sent a short, direct message. He said he was happy with me. He said Marcus's behavior suggested he wanted something more than friendship. He said he needed space, and that he was blocking Marcus's number for a while. An hour later, our doorbell camera lit up. Marcus stood on our porch, ringing the bell. Again and again, leaving the jewelry at our door like a promise or a warning. And in that moment, watching the footage with my heart pounding in my ears, I knew something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't awkward anymore. This was dangerous. Shock doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, heavy. It settles into your chest and stays there, pressing down until every breath feels measured. That's what the next few days felt like. Elian and I sat at our kitchen table with our laptops open, replaying doorbell footage like it might suddenly change. Marcus on our porch, pacing, ringing the bell, leaving the jewelry box, walking away, coming back again. Each visit lasted longer than the last. Each time, he stood closer to our windows. I noticed things I hadn't before, the way he tilted his head, like he was listening for something inside. The way his shoulders stayed squared, almost calm, as if he belonged there. I didn't sleep much. Every sound in the hallway outside our apartment made my muscles tighten. I started checking the locks twice before bed, then 3 times. Then again when I woke up in the middle of the night for no reason except a vague sense that something was wrong. Elian tried to stay calm for both of us. I'll handle this, he kept saying. He just needs time to cool off. But I could see the strain in his eyes, the guilt, the internal tug-of-war between who Marcus used to be and who he was becoming in front of us. On the 3rd day, Marcus came back again. This time, he rang the bell for almost 10 minutes straight. The camera showed him standing there long after the ringing stopped, hands in his pockets, rocking slightly on his heels. When he finally left, he didn't take the jewelry box with him. It sat outside our door for hours. When I came home from work that afternoon and saw it there, something inside me snapped, not into rage, but into clarity. This isn't about gifts, I said to Elian. It never was. Elian nodded slowly. I know. We decided to go to the police station, not to file charges, but to understand our options, to ground ourselves in reality instead of fear. The officer we spoke with was kind but careful. He explained that what Marcus had done so far, leaving gifts, ringing the bell, showing up uninvited, didn't technically meet the threshold for harassment under state law. But document everything, he said. If it escalates, that record matters. Escalation. The word lodged itself in my mind like a countdown. Over the next week, Marcus didn't just come to our apartment. He started circling Elian's life. He called the children's hospital where Elian worked, claiming there was a family emergency. When they transferred the call, Elian refused to take it. Marcus then contacted Elian's coworkers, asking if they'd seen him, saying he was worried about his safety. Some of them knew what was going on and shut him down. Others didn't, and called Elian afterward, concerned. That was the moment fear turned into something sharper. Violation. I watched Elian struggle with it in real time. He hated the idea that Marcus was causing stress at his workplace. He hated that people were being pulled into this without context. He hated that someone who had once eaten dinner at his parents' table was now making him feel hunted. We adjusted our routines without even discussing it. Elian asked his supervisor to vary his schedule. I started parking in different spots around our complex, taking different routes home, scanning faces and reflections of store windows like a paranoid cliché I never thought I'd become. Every time my phone buzzed unexpectedly, my heart jumped. And through all of it, I kept asking myself the same question in different forms. Did I miss something? Had there been an earlier warning I brushed off because I didn't want to seem jealous? Because I trusted Elian so completely that I assumed no one could threaten what we had? I replayed the first party, the house tour, the stand mixer, the knives, the invitations where I wasn't included. It was all there. I just hadn't wanted to name it. Then, suddenly, it stopped. No visits. No blocked calls. No messages through friends. Days passed, then a week. The silence was almost worse than the noise. I found myself jumping at shadows, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Elian tried to relax, but I could tell he was bracing too. We didn't trust the quiet. It was during that lull that the rumors started. A friend mentioned Marcus hadn't been seen at the usual industry events. A coworker said someone they knew had tried to reach Marcus for consulting work and couldn't get a response. Another said Marcus's connections weren't panning out the way he'd promised. At first, I didn't care. All I wanted was for him to stay away. But then Elian's friend Tom, who worked in the restaurant scene, said something that stuck with me. People are saying Marcus overpromised, Tom said. Big time. Investors that don't exist. Suppliers that never show up. It's getting messy. Something shifted inside me. Not relief, but understanding. Marcus hadn't just lost control of us. He was losing control of everything. And suddenly his fixation on Elian felt less like affection and more like desperation. The more the silence stretched, the clearer one thing became. Marcus hadn't disappeared because he'd accepted our boundaries. He'd disappeared because whatever illusion he'd been maintaining was starting to collapse, and collapse never happens quietly. It began with whispers. Elian's friend Tom mentioned that several restaurant owners were openly frustrated. Marcus had promised access to investors, to suppliers, to industry connections that could fast-track renovations or cut costs. None of it materialized. Meetings were postponed. Emails went unanswered. Phone calls rang out into nothing. A coworker of mine, Jake, brought it up casually over lunch one day. He knew someone who'd been considering hiring Marcus as a consultant for a mid-range restaurant renovation. According to Jake, the deal stalled when the owners asked for references. Apparently Marcus stopped responding after that, Jake said, shrugging. That night, Elian and I sat on the couch, the TV on, but muted, the room lit only by the glow of the screen. I could feel something tightening in my chest. Not fear this time, but dread, shaped like clarity. Do you think he lied about everything? Elian asked quietly. I didn't answer right away. I thought about the house, the expensive neighborhood, the way Marcus had spoken like ownership was a given, the gifts that arrived without receipts, the denial that never quite rang true. I think, I said slowly, he lied about enough that the rest doesn't matter. The next piece fell into place a few days later. Elian's friend Kevin, who works for a property management company that handles luxury rentals, called him unexpectedly. Kevin sounded hesitant. I don't want to cause drama, he said, but the house Marcus showed you, the one you visited? Elian stiffened beside me. That house is one of our rentals, Kevin continued. We manage it. It's not owned by him. The words landed like a dropped plate, sharp, unmistakable. Kevin explained that the property was leased under Marcus' name. Short-term, high-end, the kind of rental people use to project success they don't yet have. When Elian hung up, he stared at the wall for a long moment. I stood in that house, he said softly. I believed him. I reached for his hand. This isn't on you, I said. He built it to be believable. What followed felt less like discovery and more like excavation. We looked up news articles about the tech startup Marcus claimed had made him wealthy. The acquisition was real. The company existed. But Marcus's name didn't appear anywhere. Not as a founder, not as an executive, not even as a senior engineer. We checked business registration records for his consulting firm. It had been registered just 2 months before he started contacting restaurant owners. The address wasn't an office. It was a mail forwarding service. The picture was becoming disturbingly clear. Elian reached out to Lisa, a mutual friend from high school who'd stayed loosely connected to Marcus over the years. Lisa hesitated before answering, but when she did, she filled in gaps we hadn't known existed. Marcus hadn't been thriving in Seattle. He'd bounced between short-term tech jobs, never stayed anywhere long. At one point, he'd been driving for a delivery service. 6 months before moving back, he'd asked Lisa for money, $500, claiming he was between jobs. He promised to pay it back. He never did. When Elian told me all of this, anger finally broke through the fear. Not explosive anger, focused anger. The kind that sharpens your thoughts instead of clouding them. He used your parents, I said. Their kindness, their history. He used that to get close to you. Elian nodded, jaw tight. I keep thinking, if I'd just been clearer earlier. No, I interrupted. This wasn't about clarity. This was about access. And Marcus had lost access. A few days later, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. The text was short. Check your email. The message was from Marcus. A long apology, carefully written, controlled. He blamed stress. He admitted his behavior had been inappropriate. He promised to respect boundaries. If this had arrived weeks earlier, maybe it would have worked. Now it felt rehearsed. I don't trust it, I said after reading it twice. Elian didn't either. We decided not to respond. 2 weeks passed. Then Lisa contacted Elian again with something darker. She'd been approached by someone else from their high school class. Another person Marcus owed money to. Then another. Each with a different story. Each convinced they were helping Marcus with something legitimate. Lisa was organizing a group to track him down. Elian declined to be involved. I just want him out of our lives, he said. I don't want revenge. I understood that, but escalation doesn't ask for permission. Kevin called again. Marcus had broken his lease. Moved out in the middle of the night. Left furniture behind. No notice, no forwarding address. The property management company was pursuing him for unpaid rent and penalties. At the same time, we heard from Tom that Marcus had been telling neighbors he owned the house. Hosting loud parties. Parking too many cars on the street. Burning bridges everywhere he went. The pattern was undeniable now. Marcus hadn't been a successful man offering generosity. He'd been a desperate man building a stage set. And when the set started to collapse, he'd clung to the one thing he thought he could still control. Elian. The realization sat between us like a heavy object. I wasn't afraid of Marcus anymore. I was afraid of what people do when their illusions shatter. And I could see it in Elian too, the shift from confusion to resolve. I'm done giving him grace, he said quietly one night. I don't owe him my peace. That was the moment I knew we were approaching something irreversible. Not a confrontation. Not a dramatic explosion. But a reckoning. And it was coming fast. The lowest point didn't arrive with sirens or shouting. It arrived quietly, on an ordinary night, when the world felt too still, like it was holding its breath. Elian had fallen asleep on the couch, one arm draped over his eyes, exhaustion pulling him under before he could fight it. I stayed awake, sitting on the floor with my back against the sofa, my phone in my hand, even though there were no new notifications. I kept checking anyway. The silence was loud. For weeks, my body had been running on alert, anticipating footsteps in the hallway, the buzz of the doorbell, the vibration of an unknown number lighting up the screen. Now that Marcus was gone, the absence should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of something unfinished. I thought about everything we'd learned. The lies, the rental house, the fake success, the debts, the people he'd manipulated, the way he'd wrapped all of it in charm and nostalgia and entitlement. And I felt something uncomfortable surface beneath the anger. Grief. Not for Marcus as he was, but for the version of him Elian had believed in. The boy who'd eaten dinner at Rosa and Miguel's table. The friend who'd once written a thank you letter with careful handwriting and real gratitude. That version mattered to Elian. Losing it wasn't just disappointing, it was disorienting. I watched Elian sleep and felt the weight of how much this had taken from him. Not money, not safety, though those mattered too. It took trust. It took innocence. It took the quiet assumption that kindness will always be met with honesty. That night, I let myself imagine the worst, not because I wanted to, but because fear demands to be acknowledged. What if Marcus came back? What if desperation made him reckless? What if the silence wasn't the end, but the pause before something worse? I hated that those thoughts lived in my head now. I hated that our routines had changed, that I scanned parking lots, that Elian flinched when his phone rang unexpectedly, that our home, our safe place, had felt invaded. At some point near dawn, Elian stirred. He looked down at me on the floor, confusion giving way to concern. Why are you down there? I couldn't sleep, I said honestly. He sat up, pulling me gently against him. I could feel his heartbeat, steady, grounding. I'm sorry, he said quietly. For what? For bringing him back into our lives. I lifted my head to look at him. No, I said firmly. You didn't bring this. He did. Elian swallowed. I keep wondering if I could have stopped it earlier, if I'd returned the first gift, if I'd said something at the party. And if you had, I said, he would have just adjusted. This wasn't about miscommunication. This was about entitlement. He leaned his forehead against mine, eyes closed. I hate that he made you feel unsafe. That was the moment my resolve hardened. Because fear had been draining us slowly, quietly, and I realized that waiting, hoping, wasn't protecting us. It was leaving us suspended in a state of almost peace. Later that day, Elian told me something that cut deeper than anything else. His mother had called. Rosa had cried. Not angry tears. Broken ones. She felt responsible. She felt like her kindness years ago had somehow enabled this. She apologized to Elian for not seeing it sooner, for trusting Marcus. Elian listened. He comforted her. But after the call ended, he sat in silence for a long time. He didn't just lie to us, he said finally. He poisoned something good. That was the dark truth. Marcus didn't just disrupt our present. He reached backward into childhood, into family, into memory, and made it all feel suspect. That's what hurt the most. And that's when I knew we couldn't just wait for this to end. We had to close it. Not with cruelty, not with revenge, but with something firmer than hope, with boundaries that had teeth. Because if Marcus returned, and some part of me believed he might, we needed to be ready. Not reactive. Ready. That night, Elian took my hand and said something that felt like a line being drawn in the ground. If he contacts us again, he said, voice steady, we won't hesitate. For the first time in weeks, I felt something shift. Not relief, not peace, but strength. And strength, I was learning, often comes right after the darkest moment, when you finally stop asking why this is happening and start asking what you're going to do about it. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the silence began, right when I'd almost convinced myself we were finally past it. I was at my desk when my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail. But something in my chest tightened, sharp and insistent, and I answered before I could second-guess myself. Is this Daphne? A calm male voice asked. Yes. My name is Mr. Peterson. I'm a private investigator. I'm calling in connection with an ongoing fraud case involving a man named Marcus. The room seemed to tilt. I closed my office door quietly and sat down. Mr. Peterson explained that he was working on behalf of several individuals who had been financially harmed by Marcus. During his investigation, my name, and Elian's, had come up repeatedly, not as victims who had lost money, but as people Marcus had fixated on, targeted, attempted to control. He has a pattern, Mr. Peterson said. He approaches people from his past, people who once cared about him. He constructs a version of himself designed to inspire trust and obligation. I listened, my hand gripping the edge of the desk. Marcus hadn't just been lying. He'd been running a system. Mr. Peterson told me Marcus had contacted over a dozen people from his high school class over the past year. Each person got a slightly different story, different successes, different projects, different reasons he needed help. In several cases, he'd convinced them to hand over money for fake investments or business partnerships. He presents himself as a savior, Mr. Peterson said, or as someone who deserves loyalty because of shared history. I thought of the gifts, the jewelry, the words he'd used, I'll take care of you, you deserve this. Elian came home early that day. I told him everything, sitting across from him at the kitchen table while the afternoon light shifted slowly across the floor. When I finished, Elian was silent. Then he said very quietly, so it wasn't about me. No, I said, but you mattered. You were familiar, safe. Someone he thought he could anchor himself to when everything else started falling apart. That night, Mr. Peterson emailed us a summary of his findings. Marcus had been arrested in another state 2 weeks earlier under a different version of his name. He'd been posing as a real estate investor, running a fake investment scheme. Local police had picked him up after multiple complaints. He was facing fraud charges. And then came the part that finally released something I hadn't realized I was still holding. The judge had issued a restraining order as part of Marcus's sentencing, prohibiting him from contacting any of his known victims, including Elian, including me. Elian leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly, like he'd been holding his breath for months. I kept wondering if I was overreacting, he admitted, if we'd misread everything. I reached across the table and took his hand. You trusted your instincts. That's not overreacting, that's surviving. Marcus was sentenced to 18 months in prison, with restitution ordered for his victims. The legal system, slow, imperfect, but firm, had finally named his behavior for what it was. Criminal. Not misunderstood. Not tragic. Not redeemable through patience. That was the turning point, not because Marcus was punished, but because the doubt dissolved. I stopped replaying conversations in my head, wondering if I'd been unfair. I stopped questioning whether we should have handled things more gently. The truth had landed, solid and undeniable. Elian looked lighter in the days that followed. He slept better. He laughed more easily. The tension that had lived between his shoulders finally began to ease. One evening, sitting on our balcony as the sun dipped below the buildings, he said, I think I finally understand something. What? Compassion without boundaries isn't kindness, he said. It's an invitation. I nodded. That night, for the first time since this all began, our apartment felt like ours again. Not a place we were defending, but a place we were living in. Marcus was no longer a looming possibility. He was a closed chapter. And in closing it, we hadn't just protected ourselves. We had reclaimed our sense of reality, our safety, our power. The fallout didn't arrive with drama at our doorstep. It rippled outward, quietly and relentlessly, through people Marcus had convinced, through places he'd occupied, through stories that no longer held together once the truth was exposed. We didn't celebrate when we heard the final details of his sentencing. There was no satisfaction in knowing someone from Elian's childhood was sitting in a cell because of choices he'd made over years. What I felt instead was something steadier. Relief. Not the kind that explodes, but the kind that lets your shoulders drop for the first time in months. Word spread through Elian's old social circles faster than either of us expected. Lisa updated the group chat she'd formed with other victims. People compared notes. Patterns emerged. Promises that had never materialized. Money that was never returned. Stories that contradicted each other once placed side by side. The illusion Marcus had built didn't just crack, it disintegrated. Several people reached out to Elian privately. Some apologized for not seeing it sooner. Others admitted they'd felt something was off, but hadn't wanted to question someone who sounded so confident. A few thanked him for setting boundaries early, before money ever changed hands. That mattered more to Elian than he let on. Rosa and Miguel were shaken when they learned the full extent of Marcus's actions. Rosa cried, not just because she felt betrayed, but because she mourned the boy she'd once fed and protected. Miguel was quieter, anger simmering beneath his calm. They both apologized to Elian. He told them they had nothing to apologize for. You helped someone when they needed it, he said. What he did with that help later wasn't your responsibility. It didn't erase their pain, but it eased the weight they'd been carrying. The professional fallout was just as thorough. Marcus's name became something people warned each other about. Restaurant owners shared experiences. Industry contacts distanced themselves quickly once legal charges surfaced. The consulting business he'd tried to build evaporated almost overnight. The luxury rental company pursued him for unpaid rent and damages. Neighbors filed complaints. Former clients submitted statements. He had nothing left to hide behind. And because of the restraining order, there was no final confrontation. No dramatic apology. No last attempt to rewrite the narrative. The silence this time felt different. It felt final. Elian changed too, not in who he was, but in how firmly he stood in himself. He stopped feeling the need to explain. When people asked what had happened, he told the truth simply, without embellishment or defensiveness. He didn't minimize it. He didn't dramatize it. He owned it. Watching that was grounding. For me, the fallout showed up in smaller ways. I stopped scanning parking lots. I stopped memorizing exit routes. I stopped flinching when the doorbell rang. Our routines returned. Not exactly as they were before, but stronger, more intentional. We upgraded our home security, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. We talked, really talked, about boundaries, about how easy it is to confuse history with trust, generosity with obligation. One evening, months after it was all over, we hosted a small dinner for close friends. Laughter filled the apartment again. Music played softly in the background. The windows were open. At one point, I caught Elian watching the room, a small smile on his face. What? I asked. I was just thinking, he said, how close we came to letting someone else's chaos bleed into everything. But we didn't, I said. He shook his head. Because you didn't let me. That wasn't true, but I understood what he meant. We had chosen each other. The fallout hit Marcus hard because it was supposed to. Consequences aren't cruelty, they're clarity. And while his world shrank, ours settled. We didn't need to prove anything to anyone. We didn't need validation from the people who'd once been dazzled by him. The truth had already done its work. Quietly, thoroughly. Life didn't return to what it was before Marcus. It became something better, quieter, clearer, more deliberate. In the months that followed, Eliane and I made small changes that added up to something meaningful. We became more careful with what we shared online, more thoughtful about who we let close. Not guarded in a bitter way, but grounded in the understanding that access to our lives is earned, not inherited through history. The experience didn't make Eliane less kind. It made his kindness stronger, because now it came with boundaries. We took a short trip together not long after everything settled. Nothing extravagant, just a few days away from routines and reminders. Sitting across from him at a small cafe, watching him laugh freely again, I felt a sense of pride that surprised me. We had been tested from the outside, and we hadn't cracked. Looking back, the most dangerous part of the situation wasn't the gifts, or the stalking, or even the lies. It was the doubt. The way manipulation tries to convince you that your discomfort is the problem, that setting boundaries is cruelty, that protecting your relationship means you're being unfair. That's a lesson I carry with me now. If someone's generosity makes you feel small, watched, or indebted, it isn't generosity. If someone can't respect a no, they don't respect you. And if protecting your peace costs you someone who thrived on chaos, that isn't a loss, it's a release. Eliane and I still talk about Marcus sometimes, but not with anger, more like acknowledgement, a closed chapter we learned from. We don't wonder anymore what his intentions were or why he chose us. Understanding isn't always necessary for healing. What matters is that we trusted ourselves when it counted, that we chose each other when it was uncomfortable, that we didn't confuse history with entitlement. Our home feels safe again. Our laughter comes easily, and our future, once clouded by someone else's obsession, feels wide open. Some people enter your life to remind you how kind you are. Others enter to teach you how strong you can be. Marcus did both. And then he left. For good.